Welcome to Media Rants. I am so thrilled today to be joined by someone that I've admired for a long time, and he is Mike McCabe, one of the real democracy heroes in the state of Wisconsin. Mike has authored a book called Miracles Along County Q that I've been fortunate to read, and I encourage you all to do so also. And we'll spend this first part of the interview talking about this book. Mike is the former executive director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. He ran a spirited campaign for governor in 2018. He authored two really great political books in the past, Blue Jeans in High Places, The Coming Makeover of American Politics, and Unscrewing America, which I guess the subtitle was Hints and Hopes from the Heartland. He's also the author of one of my favorite Substacks. It's called Abion House. It is Abion, right, Mike?
It is. Yes.
Got it. Okay. That's how you know you've read Miracles Along County Q, if you can pronounce Abion. And to find out what Abion House is, you really should read the novel. It's published by Little Creek Press. You can get it from that small publisher. You can also get it on Amazon and any other place that sells books online. Mike, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Miracles Along County Q. This is your first fiction novel,
It
and
is.
you dedicate it to your brother Dan. Tell us about your brother Dan and how he inspired this story.
Well, he's now my late brother, Dan. We lost him a little over 20 years ago to colon cancer. He was 3 years older than me, so I grew up in his shadow. But when Dan was born, some things happened at the hospital where he was deprived of oxygen for a period of time,
Hmm.
sustained some brain damage at birth, and that damage created some neurological harm that left him with these facial tics and twitches, muscular twitching. His eyes would sort of roll in his head or dart from side to side. And that was just due to that neurological harm that happened at birth, just circumstances beyond his control, obviously. I don't know if it was related to the circumstances of his birth, but he also had this condition that led to him having these growths on his face and elsewhere on his body. He had a tumor in his cheek at one point, benign tumor that had to be removed, but he had these growths on the surface of his face and other parts of his body. Some were removed, which left scarring, but they would grow back or they would grow in other places. So you can imagine what a young boy who has these facial contortions or muscular twitching, whose eyes are sort of darting and rolling in his head, and he has these unsightly growths or scars on his face. You can imagine how he was treated. Kids are kids, and he suffered both physical and emotional abuse during his childhood. And I grew up watching it, sometimes from afar, sometimes from up close. But I witnessed a lot of it, and it changed me forever. It certainly made
Sure.
me incapable of engaging in that kind of bullying. It made me a better person, even as a child, because I watched my brother have to go through something that I realized nobody should have to go through. But that wasn't the remarkable thing about Dan. To me, the miracle of my brother was what he became. Uh,
Hmm.
and I readily confess that I don't think I would have turned out the way he did if I had gone through what he had. But Dan ended up being probably the friendliest and most engaging person I have ever met anywhere in my life,
Amazing.
which is remarkable because he had every reason to become the exact opposite. He had every reason to sort of curl up in a ball and sort of construct a shell around himself so he wouldn't be hurt anymore. And instead, he opened himself to people, and it just didn't matter whether somebody was dressed in a suit and tie or whether they were, wearing, grimy jeans, or he was such a friendly and engaging person, which
Hmm.
I considered a miracle. And I wouldn't have this story to tell had I not
Wow.
grown up with Dan as my brother. So, I not only dedicate the book to him and his memory, but this is Dan's story, in
Yeah.
a very real way. I didn't write a character named Dan, and I didn't write the events in the book are not based on his life story, but he's definitely the inspiration for the story.
Well, you and Dan both grew up in Clark County, Wisconsin, rural Wisconsin, where I've heard you say before the cows outnumber the people. And you've got a
This
fiction
day,
to this the very day. And you've got a fictional town in Miracles called Faith. Is that modeled on Clark County where you grew up?
it is. Faith is actually based on three different towns that I know intimately.
Mhm.
I spent the early part of my childhood in Rock County, outside a little town named Evansville. And Evansville is part of the inspiration. Some of what I draw on to describe Faith is based on elements of Evansville. Much of it is based on Owen, which is where I went to high school, and
Okay.
also, a significant part of what I drew from with Faith was Curtis, which is the little town I was closest to. I grew up on a dairy farm in Clark County outside a little town named Curtis. But where it's situated on the map is actually about halfway between two very real towns, one named Loyal and the other named Unity. And it's closest to a very small town named Ripplinger. So Faith is some people have read the book, and if they know Clark County really well, they said Faith is Ripplinger, right? And I said, no, Faith is actually Owen and Curtis and
Oh,
maybe a little bit of Evansville and Rock County. It's not Ripplinger, but it's physically located, pretty
wow.
close to where Ripplinger is, on
You
the.
mentioned going to high school in Owen, and
Yeah,
in the book, high school kids are notoriously nasty to each other, and you've got a lot of that in this book, right? I mean, your main character, Ray Glennon, is treated in a brutal way
yeah.
by kids at school. Was that something in Owen in real life?
Yeah, all of the events in the book are based on real life incidents.
Mm.
They are they are descriptions of things that I witnessed personally. And and I've talked to many readers from other parts of the state or the country who also are from small towns, and a number of them have said your school was a lot rougher than ours was. And but uh, kids, there's bullying everywhere. So maybe it takes different forms in certain places. Maybe it's worse some places than others, but there's bullying everywhere, and kids can be pretty cruel to each other. But some of this is what I saw Dan personally experience,
Right.
and then some of the incidents were what I saw other kids, my age, experience.
The first line in your novel, which I was taken with it from that first line, it's what can't be explained is magic. And that's repeated a number of times as the story progresses. What's the significance of that line for you? What can't be explained is magic.
Well, it's not really a line of mine. It's not something that I walk around saying, and it's not my favorite phrase. But I thought it up because I thought it was a good way to set the tone for the story. That
Yeah.
this is a story where there's going to be some unanswered questions. There's going to be some things that are difficult, if not impossible, to explain, and some of those things are going to seem pretty magical or definitely miraculous. And and uh and and so I thought it was a good way to set the tone, but also, that's a phrase that a character in the story, Old Man Morger, uh,
Yeah.
has a habit of saying, and he says it repeatedly. And I just thought that it was sort of indicative of his character. Old Man Morger is an educated man. He's a former school teacher, and he likes to sort of he likes to wax poetic. He likes to He likes to he likes to turn a phrase in a way that makes people think. He wants to engage people. So it's not really, to me, that line is not, it's not what's significant to me. It's basically an invitation for the reader to contemplate its meaning and to decide for themselves what that means. So I just thought it was a good way to set the tone for the story, but also it was an invitation to contemplation.
Yeah. And you mentioned Old Man Morger, who is one of the, well, I mean, all the characters are fascinating, but I believe he's a war veteran in the novel. Is that right?
He is.
Yeah, he's a war veteran. He's been in Africa. As you said, he was a school teacher where he became kind of like a rebel, right? I think he was run out for teaching the true history of I can't remember what it was, but he was teaching the true history of America essentially.
Yeah.
And is he modeled on your own relatives or people that you've known?
He's a composite
Yeah,
of a number of different people that I've known. His war history is very much my dad's war experience. My dad's a
that's what I
war
was thinking as
was a war. Yeah. Um, and he also is somewhat based on my father-in-law, but he's also based on a number of different teachers I've known over the years.
yeah,
And then no character in the story is based on me, but I did give Morger some stories about Africa because, as you know, I spent 2 years
yes.
living in West Africa, and Morger's stories about life in Africa are gifts from me.
Yeah, in fact, when I was reading those parts of the book, I thought, "Oh wow, this is like Mike telling us about you were Peace Corps, right?"
I was.
Yeah, I thought this was Mike and his Peace Corps experience, another experience in Africa. It was really wonderful.
And I
I
actually made Morger a Christian missionary. I didn't make him a Peace Corps volunteer. I thought that was more
Right.
suited to where he came from. But and then he became a teacher after service in the war. But the African stories are ones that I gave him.
And Morger, even though he's such a profound character in so many ways, he's one of the many characters in the book who is, I'll use the word transformed by your character, Ray Glennon. Ray faces so many hardships in the book. I mean, the circumstances of the birth, rejection by the father, the troubled mom, bullied at school, and so on. And yet, characters in the book believe that Ray has literal healing powers. Talk more about the character of Ray and what Ray means to you.
Well, Ray is modeled after my late brother Dan,
That's what I figured.
and I didn't write the character to look like Dan or to have uh, Dan's exact life experience. So it's not Dan's story, but Ray is inspired by my brother, and in a way, Tony, uh, I've had a couple of readers say, well, it's just not plausible that somebody who's treated that way would react to it in that way. And my answer is really simple. That's what my brother did. So if you say it's implausible, then Dan's whole life was implausible.
Yeah,
That's exactly what he did. And to me, uh, what Dan became had, to me, literal healing power, and it was transformative. It made me a different person than I would have become. I don't know where I would be. I don't know what I would be doing. I don't know exactly what kind of person I would have become, but I doubt that I would have gone down the path that I traveled, and I doubt that I'd be exactly who I am had I not effectively stood on his shoulders all these years.
let's talk a bit more about Dan and Ray because as I was reading the novel, when I when I came across the bullying and all the other rejection that Ray was receiving, I thought I can imagine a scenario, and forgive me for putting it this way, but I can imagine a scenario where he becomes like a school shooter, where he tries to extract vengeance on people. And I found it profoundly inspiring what Ray became, healing, to use your word. How did Ray become that way in your judgment? And I guess how did Dan become that way? Do you have a view on that?
I, that's a great mystery. And
Yeah,
when I say that there are unexplained uh, or unanswered questions in this story, it's because that question is unanswered to me as far as how Dan became what he became. But we were very different people. He ended up becoming a factory worker. He graduated from high school but had no other education. He was a lifelong NRA member. He loved to hunt. He was big into
wow.
NASCAR. I was more interested in NATO than NASCAR. I'm a big baseball fan, and I ended up being really interested in and involved in politics. And so we were tremendously different people, but we were very, very close. And I ended up being the person that he leaned on heavily on his deathbed and made me the executor of his will and everything. We were really close, but really different. But I don't think I would have reacted the way Dan reacted. And I don't know if I
Yeah,
would have become a school shooter, but I could imagine myself either sealing myself off from people or engaging in cruelty to sort of seek
yeah,
revenge. I mean, that's a very human response, but Dan was both capable of resisting that impulse, and he was effective. He succeeded in resisting that impulse. And so I wanted to write a character in Ray that had that same ability because because Dan's example was profoundly inspiring to me, and I think it took me in directions that I may not have traveled in life. It made me a more compassionate person. It made me,
yeah.
I think, a better person than I would have been had I not had him as a brother. And so I wanted to pay tribute to his inspiring example uh, by writing Ray Glennon.
Yeah. And Ray in the book, uh, is part of it his relationship with his mom? Because the mom, the character's name is it Jin, the
Jin,
mother?
yeah.
Jin. Yeah. She has an unconditional love for Ray, right? And is that, do you think that could be part of it? That sometimes that parental love that's unconditional, could that have been part of it?
I never thought my parents were exceptional, but what kid ever thinks their parent is
Right.
exceptional? But Dan didn't become who he was in a vacuum, just as I didn't become who
Right.
I am in a vacuum. Um, there's this myth of the self-made man, or there's this myth that we're self-made and that and in truth, we all stand on the shoulders of others. We're all the product of our environments, and I wouldn't be who I am had I not had Dan as a brother, and so that helped shape my politics too. Uh,
Absolutely.
I grew up in a very conservative area. I could imagine that I could have very possibly become a Republican, but I think my politics were also shaped by having Dan as a brother because it made me realize how we need to be there for each other and we have to look out for one another and we have to we have to accept the fact that we're not self-made, that we are shaped and molded by others. And my parents had a big impact on my life, but Dan had, I think, an even greater impact on my life just watching him grow up.
Well, the character Ray, who we now know for sure is, modeled somewhat on your brother. Ray and others in the book build the Abion house, which, I call it a shelter for people down on their luck and so on. Um, does that fictional town of Faith and, the real towns on which it's modeled, do they need Abion house because of a breakdown in public policy? Or do you think that Abion House would exist? Because for Ray, it kind of guides his life in his adulthood. He can't imagine Ray can't imagine doing anything else than helping people in that Avion house. Talk about that a little bit.
I would hope that a place like ABN House would exist in the best of times, but it is clearly needed now
Yeah,
more than ever. And small towns are suffering and they're dying. And so what I describe with faith is the story of small towns everywhere in America. And yes, there are public policy choices that have been made that resulted in the abandonment of rural America, the abandonment of small towns. That is all true. Interestingly, I based Avion House on a real place as well.
is that
Uh,
right?
it's a place called Nettle House, which my wife was involved in starting. She and others purchased a home and turned it into a house of hospitality for refugees and asylum seekers, a sort of an oasis for migrants who come and need a place just to be able to get their feet on the ground, to just get their bearings before
Mhm.
they can move on and find a place of their own. And Nettle House continues to operate today. It was started a number of years ago. My wife was one of the people involved in starting it. So as I was imagining this small town, and I was kind of borrowing elements from real small towns to kind of create this fictional place called Faith, um, I also wanted to create something like Nettle House in Faith, and that's what Avian House became. And it is a place that I think is needed more than ever. Like I said,
Well,
it would be
Mike,
nice.
I love the way you describe it on your Substack. Avion House is a place like no other, off the beaten path, where cruelty meets its match and despair goes to die. Oh my God, I love that.
Thank you.
And that is, I mean, especially now, Mike, when we're living at a time of such great cruelty, where cruelty is rewarded and praised, that there is a place where cruelty meets its match and despair goes to die. That's special.
Thank you. And it's no accident, Tony, that I wrote this book just recently. Dan passed away over 20 years ago, and I could have written a tribute to his life at any point, but it just seems like
Yeah.
there's so much cruelty in our society right now at a level that I've never seen in my lifetime. So I just thought that this was the right time to tell Dan's story in a fictional character named Ray Glennon. It was time to also write about a place where cruelty meets its match and despair goes to die.
Mike, as I was reading the book, I was imagining, a sequel where the Abion house gets even more brutal treatment from, say, ICE and things like that. I mean, it's terrible that we have to even think that way in this day and age, right? What were some of the difficult parts about writing this novel for you? For example, I believe that male writers historically have difficulty writing female characters. And that's just one example. Did you have a challenge with, say, that, or what else challenges
Well,
did you have
I
writing?
think it's up to the reader to judge whether I did justice to the female characters in the story. I think it's a challenge to write any character.
Yeah, I agree.
I didn't base any character on me, and of course, I'm the one that I know best, and everybody else I'm just observing, and so I based all these characters on very real people, very real men and women who've crossed my path at various times in my life, and I observe who they are and how they act and what they look like and all of that, and I try to capture that in characters. And I really would say it's just for the reader to decide whether I did justice to female characters. But I tell you, for me, Tony, one of the big challenges was just the fact that this was the first time trying my hand at writing fiction. I was trained as a journalist, and I've written nonfiction in various forms, newspaper length articles, magazines. I've written
Yeah.
it at book length. with nonfiction. And nonfiction, or any form of journalism, you do your research, you gather your facts, you string those facts together in a narrative that will make sense to the reader, and you tell a story. Um, Fiction writing is very different, so that was a huge challenge. But my biggest challenge is actually one that I can't talk about because it would spoil the reader's experience. But there is a secret at the end of the story that no
Right.
one sees coming. I've yet to run into a reader who saw it coming, um, and and I had to set that revelation up throughout the book. It happens, it happens like on page 210 or something like that of the story. And I had to set that up by using a writing technique that I can't describe because
Okay.
it would tip my hand, and it would sort of spoil the secret for readers who have not yet experienced the story. But it made me write in a way that I had never written before. It made me write around some things that I needed
Yeah.
to avoid in order for this secret to be kept and then revealed, on page 205 or 210 or wherever the heck it is in the story. And that was one of the both the really humbling challenges from a writing standpoint, but also it was just a glorious adventure in terms of writing, and the whole experience of writing fiction. It was just a labor of love.
Well,
I
you do
love
provide a lot of clues to that secret, and I found myself like thinking hard about this. But
it.
when we finally got to it, it was worth, the journey that got us there. Yeah, you have a couple of I'll call them racy scenes in there. Nothing goes beyond like PG-13, I don't think. But was that you, or was that like your editor saying, Mike, we got to spice this up a little bit?
No, and I didn't have, I actually had an editor or two who wanted to get rid of that chapter. Uh, and I felt that it was important to the development of the character Jin Glennon. Um,
Yeah.
I and the book has been remarkably well received. The reaction from readers has been wonderful. The reviews have been more than I ever could have hoped for. But there are always readers who just don't connect with a book. And there was a former Catholic priest who read the book and really he said, I can't tell you that I liked the book because I really disliked the character Jin, and he just felt that she was immoral. But my response to that would be that Jin was given some really impossible choices in life.
Oh, yeah.
She was dealt cards that no one should be dealt, that no one should have to make the choices that she had to make. And 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 she made the choices she made, but she is, she's a flawed human being too, partly because of all the choices that she had to make in life. And so I really felt like I wanted that scene that I think you're talking about
Yeah.
to be in the story for the sake of people fully grasping who Jin Glennon is, and love her or hate her. This is who she is, and she sort of lives on her own terms. And
Well, I mean, I think Jin is a remarkable character.
I do
I
too.
mean, yeah, yeah. I mean,
And
if
the
this
Catholic
get
priest hated her.
right, I mean, if this gets made into a play or a movie, that would be a remarkable character to play, as would Ray and really any of the characters. But what I saw in, say, that scene that we're talking about, that Jin will do anything for Ray, right? Ray has become Jin's mission in life. And I think you portray that so powerfully in this book. They have a bond. I think that bond becomes so powerful that even, what is his name? Moose, the right?
The father.
the father. Moose eventually gets transformed and seems to have a very sincere, redemption in all this, right? Comes to the realization that he'd been so wrong about Ray and even about Jin to an extent.
Now, a lot of female readers just worked up a really strong hatred for Moose over the course of the story. And I think a few of them were even a little disappointed that he's redeemed at the end of the story.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to show that people are shaped by their life experiences, and they are reflections of their character. But that doesn't mean that they stay that way forever, and that there's always the possibility for redemption. And so I wanted Moose to transform as well.
Yeah, and I was glad that you did that, Mike, because I there's this powerful ethic in this country right now that you are what you are, you'll never change, right? People stay the way they are. And if I believed that, I don't think I could be a teacher, right? I mean, the whole essence of teaching is that we're transforming each other somehow, hopefully in positive ways. And so when I saw what happened with Moose in your novel, I found that somewhat inspiring. I thought, yes, right? He finally gets it and he's finally able to express it. And crucially, Ray does forgive him, right? Because forgiveness is another thing that we have a deficit with right now in this country. And when Ray does forgive Moose, I think that's a very powerful part of the novel.
And you sum up perfectly, better than I could, why I chose to write that character the way I did, and really why I chose to write this story. It's because of those deficits that we have in our society right now. That idea that we are who we are forever and we can never change. This unwillingness to forgive, this unwillingness to have the empathy to give people opportunities to redeem themselves. That's why I wrote this story, and it's why I felt like it really needed to be said right now. And I actually think that that's why I chose fiction. Um, you know, the lines between nonfiction and fiction are blurrier than people think. People think that
Right.
they always say fact or fiction, and and you know, fiction is based on fact. And the only real difference is that imagination is used to maybe create composite characters, composite places, composite events, and tell a story in a way that maybe gets to deeper truth. And I really felt that the conditions in our country today, we need to imagine the world we want rather than simply feel like we're stuck with the world we have. We need to be able to imagine a better society where people do understand that they are forever changing, where people are willing to cut each other some slack and forgive and give people opportunities for redemption. I just felt like it was so important to tell that kind of story right now.
Well, you did it very well, Mike, and I really appreciate it. And I want to once again, as we close this, encourage people to get the book Miracles Along County Q by Mike McCabe. You can get it at Little Creek Press, which is the publisher, or you can find it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. If you are watching this and you live in Oshkosh, they have it at the Caramel Crisp bookstore. I encourage you to get it there. Mike, thank you so much for doing this. We're going to come back and do part two where we'll get back into the real world.
All right. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.